El RMTC es un evento muy importante para nosotros y para la industria arrocera, y no queríamos dejar pasar un año sin tener evento. Aunque en estos momentos las condiciones no nos permiten reunirnos en persona, esperemos que el próximo año las condiciones mejoren y podamos reunirnos en una hermosa ciudad del hemisferio occidental. Les quiero dar las gracias a nuestros ponentes Dwight Roberts, Stuart Hoetger, Milo Hamilton y Dennis DeLaughter. Todos los ponentes son figuras muy reconocidas en el gremio y sé que tienen información muy importante que compartirán con ustedes. Un reconocimiento en especial a Stuart Hoetger, que tomó el lugar de Thomas Wynn, que desafortunadamente no nos pudo acompañar hoy. Dennis DeLaughter tampoco nos pudo acompañar en persona por una emergencia familiar, pero nos mandó su presentación por video. Durante las sesiones, pueden mandar sus preguntas o comentarios haciendo clic en el icono que aparece en la parte inferior de sus pantallas de Zoom. Un agradecimiento muy especial a nuestros patrocinadores y expositores por todo su apoyo. Por favor, no olviden de visitar los booths virtuales yendo a nuestra página web, donde encontrarán los logos de las empresas participantes. Ahí pueden hacer clic, como ven en la pantalla, en los logos, donde toda la información de las empresas se encontrarán ahí. También pueden visitar directamente con las empresas vía sus cuentas de Zoom, que encontrarán las horas que estarán presentes después de nuestra conferencia. Por último, les pedimos que participen y contesten las encuestas que aparecerán después de cada ponente y a la misma vez aprovechen este tiempo para mandarnos las preguntas para el ponente que acaba de participar. Muchas gracias y les cedo la palabra a Dwight Roberts, CEO y presidente de US Rice Producers Association, que nos presentará La tormenta perfecta no ha terminado. Dwight.
Muy bien, gracias Marcela y buenas tardes a todos. Extraño ver ustedes en persona. Ya me cansa este virus y el año 2020, aunque tenemos 2 meses todavía para cumplir este año. Espero el día cuando podemos encontrar de vuelta, cenar juntos, conversar y que tenemos una vida normal. No sé cómo o cuándo, pero cada día se salta algo realmente en el mercado o en el mundo. Cada vez más estoy convencido que realmente el 2021 también va a ser algo que no normal tampoco. Antes de comentar más sobre eso, yo quiero avisar a todos ustedes que la triste noticias que recibimos esta semana del fallecimiento de nuestro amigo Daniel Filigoy de Corrientes, Argentina, nos pegó de gran sorpresa, muy triste. Daniel, ustedes conocen a Daniel. No hay nadie que creo que no conoce su sonrisa, su actitud, su voluntad. Un gran amigo mío, un gran amigo de US Rice Producers, de todo el sector arrocero, un luchador para el productor y el sector industrial en Argentina. Daniel Filigoy, un tipo de persona inolvidable. Una noticia muy triste esta semana. Como dije, extrañamos ver ustedes encontrar con el arroz, como Marcela mencionó. Esperamos volver a tener la conferencia siempre y cuando tenemos la vida re sano en un sentido. en el futuro. Yo siempre llamé justamente el mercado de arroz de este año la tormenta perfecta. En varios momentos anterior de ustedes que conocen esa película de cine, el enorme ola que vino en esa película para nosotros fue el principio de marzo, cuando el pánico realmente fue al máximo. Pero esa tormenta continúa. Esa tormenta tienen experiencia en Mercosur también. Nos afecta a todo, y los eventos inesperados continúa y va a continuar en el 2021. Yo quiero agradecer a Stuart, Dennis DeLaughter y Milo Hamilton para participando hoy en estas charlas, porque vale la pena hablar, por supuesto, sobre la cosecha en Estados Unidos, que está en sus fines, sin mayor novedad hasta el momento. Pero las condiciones mundial, cada día que mira las noticias pasa algo. Por supuesto, el COVID es el cuento del año, pero sin el virus es las condiciones climáticas en muchas partes del mundo nos asusta bastante. A ustedes también, si es la seca en el Mercosur, tan bravo ahí, eventos en Asia y los huracanes en Estados Unidos. Justamente hoy en el puerto de Lake Charles, Louisiana, empezaron de vuelta a cargar barco de arroz paddy, este barco destinado para el Brasil, primer embarque de arroz a Brasil de Estados Unidos. En 2010 hubo un embarque de 30,000 toneladas, 35,000 toneladas de arroz, pero en el 2002, 2003, Estados Unidos llegó a exportar como 350,000 toneladas de arroz, un volumen en blanco, arroz blanco en el 2001-2003, casi 350,000 toneladas, que fue en paddy principalmente, por otras condiciones. Esa era en la época cuando Paraguay no producía arroz prácticamente. Paraguay vino sembrando cada año más y llegó a ser un origen muy importante y principal en el mercado en años adelante. Lo que está pasando en Paraguay en este momento con esa sequía, con el nivel del río, es algo que nos asusta realmente y debe preocupar. Si tú eres comprador de paddy, importador de paddy en tu país, estas condiciones deben preocupar a ustedes. Yo veo los policies de gobiernos también han cambiado tanto frecuente en eventos como eso, cambian de leyes, de aranceles tan tan importante por seguridad alimentaria en su país. Ustedes saben que normalmente negociando un tratado libre de comercio lleva años, pero eventos como eso está convenciendo países de eliminar aranceles y dando cuotas muy pronto en un sentido. Yo veo asuntos de CAFTA, de TLC América Central con Estados Unidos, el evento de Trans-Pacific Partnership, que incluye los países México, Perú, Chile y Canadá, con la idea que el arroz de Vietnam en pocos años tiene acceso a esos mercados sin arancel, en un término total de 10 años no más, y estamos en el cuarto año de eso. Nosotros queremos tener varias sesiones. Marcela estaba diciendo en el futuro para completar esta convención en un sentido durante la época de Zoom. Yo creo que Zoom va a existir para siempre, aunque cuando estamos normal en poder viajar y tenemos un vacuno que tiene confianza en usarlo, el Zoom va a tener su lugar, en los negocios, en la educación del mercado y cualquier cosa relacionado en los commodities y por supuesto en el arroz. En los próximos sesiones queremos tocar varios temas. Vamos a organizar quizás con Yamila Sáenz, quien es presidente de Conmasur, los molinos de la Confederación de Mercosur, y ver cómo va la situación en el Mercosur tan importante en las Américas. Brasil, el más grande productor de arroz en las Américas, el más grande consumidor y productor. Lo que pasa en Brasil se siente el choque en todas las Américas. Así que vamos a seguir conversando. Yo veo desde, como Dennis DeLaughter me dijo la semana pasada, desde 40,000 pies de altura, yo veo el mercado bullish, positivo en sentido de precios a nivel de productor, pero tenemos muchas cosas de saltar entre ahora y adelante. No solamente COVID, no solamente asuntos climáticos, tenemos una elección de presidente de que saltar en menos de 2 semanas. ¿Cómo nos va a dejar después de eso? Entonces, pero por el momento es importante saber acerca de la cosecha en la Delta, en Arkansas, que es tan fundamental. Como Arkansas aumentó 28% su producción. Entonces, yo voy a devolver eso a Marcela y luego a Stuart para hablar acerca del mercado de cash y la cosecha que está en su último capítulo ahora en la Delta. Marcela.
Muchas gracias, Dwight. Como siempre, tus palabras muy interesantes. En este momento vamos a tener una encuesta que aparecerá en sus pantallas. Por favor, participen y contesten. A la misma vez, por favor, mándenos las preguntas para Dwight. Después de esta pregunta, después de la encuesta, empezaremos con las preguntas. Gracias. Gracias por sus respuestas. Nosotros también quisiéramos que fuera presencial. Esperemos que esas son las condiciones que se preste el mercado y el mundo el próximo año. En este momento, no tenemos ninguna pregunta para Dwight. A la misma vez vamos a poder tener una sesión de preguntas y respuestas al terminar con todos los ponentes. Y como quiera, síganos mandando sus preguntas y al final estaremos regresando a ellas. Dwight, muchas gracias. A continuación, tenemos a Stuart Hoetger, que es el socio fundador y director ejecutivo de The Stogan Group en California. Y él nos estará presentando las condiciones actuales de la cosecha y el mercado y los mercados de cash. Stuart, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you. Let me share my screen here. All right. Can everybody see my screen? I'll take that as a yes. So today's presentation is probably going to be a little bit short on the cash market update, largely because there hasn't been a whole lot of developments on that front for the last several weeks, despite all of the weather and other circumstances that Dwight already mentioned. And also because Dennis and Milo will be covering much of the global stuff, and Dennis will be covering some more of the market fundamentals. That being said, we'll at least get some basic information of what we're seeing on the ground and go from there. So today, basically, I'm going to cover the size of the crop, the yields, and the quality. We'll talk briefly about the cash market, which again, as I mentioned, will be a quicker portion. And then we'll talk briefly about the export versus domestic demand and kind of break that down and explain what we see happening and how COVID is having an impact on both of those. So for Texas and Louisiana, Texas is basically considered completely harvested. There are still a few guys bringing in rice, but for the most part, it is done. Louisiana should be finishing up this week. And of course, everybody knows about the impact that the Hurricane Laura and Hurricane Delta have had on the fields. Several cases of the wind and the rain blowing down the rice, which again, causing the rice to lay flat, which makes the harvest much slower, and also can impact quality when it arrives to the mill. So as a result of the Hurricane Laura and Delta, the two states that usually harvest a second crop are expected to bring in just a fraction of what they normally harvest in their second crop. In fact, in many cases, especially in Louisiana, the rice fields are still underwater in some cases, meaning that those that do have the second crop aren't even able to get out to the field to harvest it. As a result, that is going to bring down the state average yield to some degree. We won't really know more on that until probably another few weeks or so. Again, right now, each month, starting from August until January, the USDA or the FSA releases the certified crop acre report, which gives us a better idea of what actually was planted. Right now, all we know is what was planted from back in the June acre report. And so now starting in August, September, October, we get a better idea of the true amount of ground that was planted. And we'll basically take that with what we expect yields to be. And that's how we're going to arrive at our total beginning supply, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. But right now, milling yields in Texas, they're struggling with 5570, which is the benchmark head and total, the quality for exporting rice. Louisiana seems to be okay. but the 50 not being able to make a 5570 is a little bit concerning for some of those folks in Texas that are trying to sell rice. Arkansas, winds and rain from Laura and Delta, as I mentioned, have resulted in some down rice, but for the most part, if you talk to growers and marketers in that state, they will tell you that the damage from those two hurricanes is actually less than they originally anticipated. So that is some positive news. Again, the quality may still be a little bit lower than last year, but we won't know more of that until we mill more rice. And again, we'll talk about this in a minute, but milling has been much slower this year compared to years in the past. Mississippi and Missouri, they're still underway, slightly behind schedule, especially in Missouri. But so far, again, same story as in northern Arkansas. The effects of the hurricanes and the weather seem to not have been as bad as as most expected. That being said, there has been several weather delays just due to rain and other issues, which is causing that rice to be harvested much slower. So this is just a quick chart to look at U.S. long grain yields. If you can't see it well, basically this chart includes the Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Missouri, and Texas yields year over year for the last 10 years, 20 years, I should say. And you can see that yields will fluctuate anywhere from 6,500 weights an acre up to as high as, we'll say, 8,500 weights an acre. And so on average, I would say for U.S. long grain, we expect anywhere between a 70 and 75. This year, we are currently forecast at 7,500 weights an acre, which is better than last year, which was only 7,200 weights an acre. So despite the hurricanes, which is surprising, and all of the other turmoil that was caused by weather, the national long grain average yield is expected to be 2 to 3 million hundredweights higher than last year. Couple that with added production, obviously we have a lot more rice to market this year. So as far as export demand by type, I wanted to include this chart, even though it's not a real accurate picture of what we expect to see happening. Again, Dwight mentioned a situation in Brazil earlier, and that one cannot be overlooked. Right now, they've already booked 113,000 metric tons. This is the first time they've bought U.S. rice in almost 10 years. So that's a really positive component for the U.S. long grain market. But on the other side of that, you've seen Mexico, which has been very slow to purchase, with sales down 100,000 tons from this time last year. And not to mention Haiti, which is also extremely slow. We've sold about 100 and some odd thousand tons less to Haiti this year than last year. So you put those two components together, Haiti and Mexico, and unfortunately, as you can see in the table here, they are far from offsetting the increase that we have to Brazil. Now, the one caveat to the situation is that Mexico has definitely demonstrated a willingness to purchase more rice. I think a lot of it now is just coming down to the logistics and putting the orders together. And so the decline in demand that we've seen in Mexico year to date is not necessarily going to be indicative of what that market actually does. And so there is some optimism regarding exports. That the USDA currently forecasts it up 5% from last year. We expect that to probably hold true. So while export demand is extremely slow to materialize so far, most would expect that to improve in the weeks ahead. We're seeing the same thing also. I know in Latin America, medium grain is much of a lower interest, as it's mainly used only in sushi and maybe some confectionery markets. Medium grain demand is also extremely slow. And most of the business we're seeing is only done on a tender basis rather than on an actual demand basis. So you would think with that prices would start to move lower, and they're not. We're not seeing that happen a whole lot. And talking to one grower yesterday, the reason that they're using is basically the fact that the pipeline, the business that the pipeline was empty, bone dry coming into new crop, with the tightest carry out in almost a decade. The least amount of stocks in almost a decade. Mills are needing to buy paddy and needing to pay for it in order to get their mills up and running. So as a result, there is an underlying support to the paddy market, despite the large supply we have. Just the amount of time it takes to refill that pipeline, that's keeping some sort of pressure there in the market. U.S. long grain stocks and total supply. One thing we always want to look at is, okay, great, we're carrying almost small stocks we've seen in a very long time. As you can see, that's the orange bar chart here in this graphic, and you can see that the stocks, while they were very low compared to historical trends, when you actually add back in the total production, you can see on that green line that total supply is actually up at a relatively higher level, an above average level. So what that means is basically we need more demand in order to keep prices firm, or we need global prices to stay elevated to support U.S. long grain prices. So this is the world market price as published by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the USDA. Elevated global prices are expected to support the U.S. market, as I mentioned, and with Vietnam and Thailand, approaching harvest and all of that as well, the market is going to should be firm for the foreseeable future, at least on the I should say we don't expect to see any major drop off in the immediate future. And I think part of that is also the result of a near record global trade, which I'm sure Milo will talk more about and provide way more information than I can on that subject. And I look forward to hearing that. For basically kind of the recap for U.S. grain, cash prices are sideways. There has not been a lot of movement one way or another in the last 8 weeks, 10 weeks. And in fact, if you look back all the way 1 year from now, the paddy market was actually trading at the exact same level as it is today. And so you're talking to Thomas Wynn and a few others, we keep preparing and waiting for the market activity to tick up, to build, to increase, and we're just not seeing that happen a whole lot. And half that has to do with just the fact that demand has been slow to materialize. Growers have been waist deep, no pun intended, in harvesting down in Louisiana and Texas, as well as the other states. But we do expect to see the cash market activity start to pick up to create more market transparency, probably starting within the next 2 weeks. The story is very similar to futures, which again, I think Dennis will talk briefly on in his presentation, but the futures have been relatively flat as well for the last 8 weeks, basically throughout harvest. And so while open interest and volume tend to fluctuate quite a bit, showing you some signs that views of demand is shifting one up and down. People are kind of beginning to look at taking positions, but for the most part, it's been very slow to go up or down. Prices have been pretty much sideways. The grower sentiment is positive. Talking to growers in Louisiana, Texas, Arkansas, Mississippi, all within the last few days. Basically, the farther up the river you go, the more patience you're seeing. Part of that has to do with the barge rate, I should say. The barge rate up in Mississippi, Arkansas area is up near $1. Normally, it's only 70 cents. So getting rice down the river is very costly. And as a result, marketers are forced to offer a lower price in order to offset the logistical costs. Unfortunately for the market, the growers are still waiting to receive better prices, better offers. Those that have been willing to sell at today's prices, which has been between $5 and $5.25 a bushel, have mainly done so because they don't have the space for it in their own bins. Those that have the space to store their rice are opting to store the rice, hoping for better prices down the road. And so I think ultimately what we will have to see happen is the demand to continue to be slow to allow those growers to begin considering lower prices, or they're going to wait for demand to pick up and then they're going to expect higher prices. And so right now, again, we're kind of in this limbo stage where we are trying to determine which direction the market's going to go, which is going to be a function of demand. Since we already know supply is going to be much higher than the total marketable supply, as I mentioned earlier, is going to be above average as well. So at this point, the real caveat is going to be demand. The one thing we wanted to point out is USA rice milling is down almost 20% from last year. So what I look at when I'm looking at total milling data, I look at the amount of milled rice we've exported, and I then take the total milling that we've done, and I deduct those from each other to find out how much domestic business we have done year to date. Right now, that doesn't really work because most of the milled rice we've exported has been basically rice that was milled before August, and so that's not an overly helpful statistic right now. But knowing that we've only milled 17 million hundredweights of rice compared to the average, or compared to last year, that was 21 million hundredweights. What it tells you is that the domestic business is certainly slowed down. To what degree, it's hard to know for sure, but what I can say is that the domestic market is about 110 million hundredweights. It's about 60% of our total market, our total for U.S. long grain. And so if you take that domestic market and it slows down, you can see quickly how that could have a bearish impact on the overall market. Now, of that 60% of the domestic market, about 1/5 of that, 20% of that goes to basically restaurants, hotels, schools, etc. Now, all of us know due to COVID, restaurants are closed, schools are closed, hotels are very slow, and in some cases even closed. So that segment of the domestic market is taking a huge hit right now, one that we don't really know when it will come back. That also tends to be a higher value market because it's a U.S. market, and so you're taking a higher value market and you're making it a much smaller. And we don't know when that's going to return to normal again. For example, there are some restaurants that are opening up, but in the cases that they're only opening up at 25% to 50% capacity. So as a result of that, sure, they're open, but the demand that we're seeing in those restaurants is nowhere near what it normally is. So those are all components that we have to kind of take into consideration. We do think export demand is going to be up significantly from last year. The USDA is optimistic about domestic demand being up against last year as well. I'm not personally, I don't see it that way as much as the USDA does. I would like to be more optimistic about the domestic picture, but from what we can see, even in California and other major states, major consuming states, it's just the US is a long ways away from being reopened, which means those hotels and those schools and those restaurants are going to be slow to ramp up their purchasing. I think that's it. So anyways, I appreciate your time, and hopefully there was some bits of information in there. If you have any questions or want more information, feel free to send me an email and I can get you whatever you need. And me gustaría pretender que yo hablo un poquito español, entonces si necesita algo, por favor, me contactan. Gracias.
Gracias, Stuart. Español excelente, igual que tu presentación. Muchas gracias otra vez por acompañarnos a última hora, pero como siempre, la información que nos has dado sobre el mercado muy interesante. Aquí otra vez tendremos una encuesta en sus pantallas para darnos un poquito de tiempo, aparte de que la contesten, por favor, que también nos manden las preguntas para Stuart. Y como él dijo, en español o en inglés, porque es bilingüe, entonces esperamos sus respuestas a la encuesta. Unos segunditos más. Perfecto, muchas gracias por la información. La tomaremos en cuenta para los siguientes seminarios. Aquí estamos viendo que en el momento no hay preguntas para Stuart, pero por favor sigan mandándonos las preguntas. Como ya mencioné, vamos a tener otra sesión de preguntas y respuestas al final de la conferencia. En este momento seguimos con la presentación de Dennis DeLaughter, que es el director ejecutivo y analista de mercado de Progressive Futures. Y él estará presentando futures de arroz y fundamentos de mercado a causa del COVID-19. Gracias.
Hello, everyone. This is Dennis DeLaughter. Sorry I can't be with you in person. However, I do want to go through some of the market conditions and give you a brief overview of what the situation is that we're facing right now as we head into the winter months and we have the harvest of 2020 pretty much behind us. We're going to do three things today. I'm going to look at the current U.S. supply and demand. I'm then going to take a look at the current world supply overview. This is only going to be very briefly because I want to set up Milo and his presentation that will follow. Then I'm going to take a look at the COVID situation again and the economic outlook that we have based off what is going on with COVID. So let's start first of all with the U.S. supply and demand picture. When you take a look at the number of acres that we have planted, it was a large amount here in the 2020 year based off of what we're looking at from the USDA. Last year we had 1.7 million acres of long grain, 1.77. 2020 we're up to 2.192 million acres planted, and the harvested acres, that's an increase of 414,000 acres, but the harvested acres are up even more. The harvested acres last year a little bit lower because of the weather conditions. This year a little bit higher percentage is going to be harvested, and so as a result we're actually getting about 12,000 more acres harvested in the long grain than what we were expecting based off the same type of numbers presented in the area planted. When we take a look at the supply and demand after the 2020 harvest, what we're looking at right now, this is according to the recent USDA WASDE report. The beginning stocks, 32.6 million hundredweights in 19. It's dropped to 16.9 in 2020. But the production number for 2020 is way up, almost 45 million hundredweights increased production. So you can see that 170 million hundredweights of long grain being harvested this year. Imports are still at 29.5 million, which gave us a total supply up about 28 million hundredweights to 216.4 million hundredweights as the total supply. Domestic usage is going to be increased according to the USDA up to 111 million hundredweights, and they're expecting exports also to be quite substantially higher from 64.6 up to 71. And of course, that would put the total usage up substantially, almost 11 million hundredweights in this particular set of numbers. So the ending stocks, they're going to jump from 16.9 to 34.4. But what we want to do is we might reference that back to the ending stocks of 2018, which will be the beginning stocks of 2019. So it's just a little bit more than what we had at the end of the 2018 year. So while it's a high number, it's not a number that is totally outside of what we would have expected given the number of acres that we had. When we look at the U.S. numbers from a long grain standpoint, you can see that the ending stocks number is 34.4, and compared to the last 10 years, that's just a little bit higher than what we've seen, but not as high as 2010. But the usage is the highest we've ever seen at 182 million hundredweights. So usage continues to be at a fairly good level. Average farm price for this year is expected to be $11.50. That's $253.50 a metric ton. Frankly, I think it will be a little bit higher than that, but that's just my opinion at this point. I think there's a backdrop that is bullish to the market that is going to keep cash prices bid a little bit more than what we would normally see if we didn't have such a bullish backdrop. Let's take a quick look here. That takes care of the current U.S. supply and demand numbers. So let's take a quick look now at the current world supply, and I'm just going to do this as an overview just to set Milo up and all the great information he's going to have that follows this. So just to give you a quick overview of this, we're still, of course, comparing ourselves to the China because the China numbers are so large, but you can see that ending stocks number in 2019 up to 177 million metric tons, and the last USDA report, they showed it up to 179.2, but notice that China didn't change. China held on to that 116.5 compared to last year. So all of a sudden, that constant increase in China has stopped, and we're expecting that number to probably start dropping. When we come to the ending stocks number, million metric tons, You can see that we've got India, of course, in the lead there at 30. But by the way, that 30 is down 5 million metric tons from the last time we did this, which was in August. The August report till now, we've seen a 5 million metric ton decline, and most of that was here in this ending stocks of 2019. And there you can see the ending stocks. The USDA projects now for 2020, 31.5 in India, 1.52 in the United States. Other numbers are, you can see, are a little bit lower here, 85 in Vietnam and 4.44 million metric tons in Thailand. When we look back at Thailand, by the way, you can see all this huge inventory they had because of their intervention program back in 2009 and 10. And you can see they've been able to whittle that down to a much more reasonable number. And of course, the other big number that's on the screen is what's happened with India. Now, when we look at this 31.5 and compare it to the world exporting country carryover number, you can see this is what's happened of the 5 countries together without China involved in it. You can see the export numbers had declined in 16 and 17 down to 28 million metric tons, and they're now back up to 39, but that's still below 2012. Of this 39.06, that is what's India right there, 31. So they have certainly gotten the big lion's share of the current available stocks for exporting countries. So that sets up just kind of a quick overview of the world supply. And so now what I want to do is go into the COVID situation, kind of let you see what that looks like now, because certainly things have changed here. Obviously, the United States still is in the lead, and new cases are up. When we look at the number of cases compared to India and Brazil, those numbers, those countries are still going up. Notice that China has dropped off the face of the earth when it comes to COVID, and that's just because they gave up and they're not reporting it. So that's the bottom line there. But again, India has a huge population, and that number of new cases is certainly concerning when we look at that total. When we look at the test results on a per day basis, it kind of gives you a feel for things, kind of have that little V going on here. Things were looking pretty good back in August as we thought we were headed in the right direction. We talked about this number needing to stay below 5%. You can see the positive test numbers have started to go back up again. I should mention that there are 2 types of tests that are the majority of the COVID tests, and one has only an 80% accuracy rate. One is very high at 95, 96%. The rapid test is actually showing up a whole lot more false negatives, or false positives, I should say. And so that may have some impact on this particular number. But a lot of people prefer the rapid test over the more invasive nasal swab. And so I think that they're looking at these test results here with a lot of test results coming back the next few days being negative. We've had that happen here in our area with multiple people that we know who have been tested positive, and then they go back and do the bigger test and they come back negative. And so that does change a little bit about what's going on here with the positive numbers. But what probably is not changing a whole lot as far as these kind of conditions go is the average U.S. deaths. There is a lot of question about the data. Some of these numbers are coming, and there are people that have been stated that they have died from COVID, that they're really not sure that's the case. And that's because of the economic environment that we're in that rewards medical operations that are treating COVID patients. So when you put all that together, it's really hard to know how accurate the data is, but nevertheless, it is the data, and we have to follow it. You can see the trend is down here a little bit, but here recently, the average death toll, this is the 7-day average line here in the dark color. It does look like that we've started to tilt back up a little bit. That's the current situation for the COVID scenario. When we look at the economy and how it's been affected, this is the TSA checkpoint travel numbers 2020 compared to 2019, and you can see that we are way below what we were as the number of of people walking through the checkpoints at the airports. So we're still not seeing travel getting back to normal in regards to airplane travel here in the United States. When we look at the number of people going out and eating on a regular basis, from either they're going out and they're being seated in diners, either from a online or a phone or a walk-in reservation, you can see that the 7-day average here, of course, it fell off the earth and we went to zero here for a period of time as we shut down completely. But you can see that we have started to climb back up. With Texas and Florida right here, you can see that they have some higher numbers, maybe because of the warmer climate. But we are still well below that zero level. And so we're still seeing an impact when it comes to the number of people who are eating out in restaurants. When we look at hotel occupancy, it really is continuing to be below level, below 50% of what it would be in a normal situation. Now, if you look back up here, you can see we've never been more than the 80% level. And one of the reasons is because we've built so many more hotels during this period of time. But still, we're not seeing the hotel occupancy at a level that we would expect, and that indicates that we've got a lot of hotel rooms that are probably available for use, and maybe some big hotel deals coming up during the winter months. Gasoline. Gasoline isn't down as much as you might expect from the same week in 2019. It's just about 10% lower than what it was. People find that the car is still their own way to stay away from COVID. So there is a little bit more driving going on, but still it's down 10% compared to year ago levels. Housing starts, the red line represents 2020. You can see the big drop off that we had as the COVID spike hit. And now you can see housing starts have picked back up and are pretty much running along normal lines, and we're expecting them to increase. The builders have a lot of confidence right now based off of the current real estate markets. When we look at the unemployment rate, you can see we had the big spike of unemployment claims, up to 25 million Americans asking for assistance in unemployment. That number has come back down to 10 million. But what's really interesting about this is during this period of time, of course, the government has gone to great lengths to support the unemployed, and we've seen a lot of economic stimulus added in this process. So that has kept the retail sales rocketing higher, and after the big dip from the COVID shutdown, you can see that we're now making all-time highs in retail sales in both the retail and food sector, as well as with the gasoline and the fuel added to it. So we're seeing an improving consumer confidence when it comes to this. So we've got analyst confidence remaining up. Housing remains strong. The consumer is still very active. And what could go wrong? Well, this is what we're looking at, is the flu season coming up. And you can see the arrow here, which represents today's date. I'm doing this on the 21st. And so you can see how the situation is expected to get worse. And there's a lot of concern that as it gets worse, we will see a COVID spike, and we could start to see the government force additional shutdowns and another slowdown coming in the economic picture. Obviously, we have got some positive conditions in regards to vaccine and therapeutic treatment of the COVID. It's better than what it was a year ago. But at the same point in time, we are still probably several months away from having vaccines that are available. And therapeutic conditions, of course, are dependent upon on the medical examination and how the background of that particular patient is. So at this point, we don't have any solid signs that we're on even close to headed back to a normal scenario. So my final thoughts here is I think the U.S. supply is going to be larger, but it's going to take some time to fill in the holes. That's still basically what I was saying a couple of months ago. I think prices could actually stay up a little bit here just based off of the world conditions, which I think will be evident as Milo goes through his presentation. World market is vulnerable to supply issues, and prices, I think, are going to remain elevated in 2021 for the most part. And again, I'll let Milo address that in more fully. And COVID-19 is better. Confidence has been better over the last several months, but obviously there's some concern growing right now, and we are far from normal. So that is the situation that we have at this point. That's the market outlook for 2020 that I have. Again, sorry I couldn't be with you this time. Maybe next time. Hope you're having a great time, and I'll turn it back over to the USRPA.
Ok, muy bien. Gracias, Dennis, aunque no estás. Tenía una emergencia muy seria, entonces en la próxima ocasión. Antes de que Milo empiece a conversar, yo quería decir, quiero agradecer a Milo a tomar tiempo para estar con nosotros hoy. Milo, yo sé que durante este año, Milo siempre muy activo, eso sí, todos sabemos que tiene una energía tremendo, pero lo que me impresionó tanto durante este año del virus, Milo han enfocado muchísimo sobre Asia, participando en varias reuniones, conferencias Zoom, con presentaciones con los países Vietnam, Thailand, India, toda la área con los principales figuras asiáticos de arroz. Y yo pedía a Milo como el arroz en Asia es realmente, para mí, es el nube por encima de todo. Es el, ¿cómo se dice? Umbrella, sombrilla por encima, ¿verdad? Y uno nunca puede negar lo que está pasando en Asia, pero Milo hace durante todo ese año está enfocando bastante tiempo extra en lo que está pasando en Asia. Entonces, estoy pidiendo que él explica cómo el virus está afectando y cómo él ve con los contactos que él tiene en Asia, cómo él ve el mercado en las Américas mirando desde Asia. Milo, es tuyo.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Milo Hamilton. I was amply introduced by Dwight and Stuart, and also in absentia, Dennis. I'm going to talk to you about the rice market and the changes that have happened. But first of all, I want to explain what my company is. We are an advisor to the marketing chain, largely located in the US, but also in other areas. I've traveled almost every country in Asia. And the word first grain actually comes from an old Chinese aphorism, which says that more precious than pearls and jade are the 5 grains of which rice is first. So what it's saying is that if your children are starving, you will sell your pearls and jade to buy rice. We haven't had that kind of famine in the United States, only twice in the last 2 centuries, but in the Far East, it happens too often. And so a lot of the policies in the Far East, which are the background for my talk, come from years of difficulty with feeding and having people having enough to eat. Today, I want to talk to you about the price, but in the background is that frightening possibility of hunger. In this country, we are having trouble getting lunches for people in the United States, and we have all the rice in the world that we need, as Stuart said. I am going to talk to you about a stairway. It's an uneven stairway of the price of rice. And it actually started with a downturn in the US market after the June rally, which created a lot of difficulty for people that use the futures market in Chicago. But it's been followed by a higher price in South America, not because they don't have the rice, but they basically exported everything and they got down to where they now have to import. They've got the same problem in beans and corn because China has gone over to South America and to Brazil and bought 30% more than a year ago. And it's not about China or the US, it's about the fact that we have basically become destabilized not on the availability, but the accessibility of supply. So it's different. Available, we got the demand and supply, but is it available and when is it available? COVID, I believe, is a disruptive non-seasonal storm cloud for rice. And you can see from Dennis data and also from certain countries in the Far East like Malaysia and Myanmar that the rates of cases are going straight up. Myanmar is located right next to China, and because China is not reporting data anymore, I wonder if maybe those southern provinces have more of the problem than they're reporting. We don't know. Something we need to not forget about is that once you get outside the Americas, most of the rice is produced on small plots by informal labor that's migratory. That means they get the money that day and they buy the food. And this is the only grain, world grain, that's grown that way. Everything else is grown with tractors and large holdings and streamlined technology to get the stuff out of the field and to the customer. So there's no problem in the other grains. It's just rice alone. We have seen disruptions in the last 12 months. I started out my presentation with a massive technological disruption. I ask your patience on that one. Global pandemic, we didn't have that a year ago. We didn't have an unemployment crisis. Well, it's getting better, apparently, according to the data that Dennis reports, which is very encouraging. Commodity inflation, we're getting some commodity inflation indicators and a much weaker dollar. We think that the dollar weakness will probably add $1 onto our average price this year in the South in the long grain market, just because of the weakness in the dollar. We've had record fires in California. I'm sure Stuart is well aware of that. Storms in the Gulf, double storms, floods in China, Bangladesh, and now Vietnam seems to be suffering from floods. Cambodia, Nigeria had awful floods, drought in Thailand and in Mercosur. And in July, I'll get into this, Nigeria had tremendous dry weather for 4 weeks. It's a comedy of errors. The riots in the US, and now the second largest rice producer in Nigeria sent me a Twitter, which shows the police opening firing on crowds in Lagos that were protesting police brutality, if you can believe that. So record plunge and rally in the US equities. If you wanted a normal market, you need to go to another planet or world or something. And 2021 could be even more difficult because we don't know what lies ahead of us. Uncertainty is something that we're very largely likely to get. Remember, there's a difference between demand and supply, which is what's available and what's accessible. Particularly in India, we've had problem getting container shipments and getting the stuff from the field to the port. Let's back off a second and go back to what's happened since 1990. We've seen a massive increase in the production of rice in many areas of the world. Mostly in Asia. In the Americas, we've actually seen a decline in total area grown, and it's been offset by larger yields. You can see that particularly in Brazil, where the area's gone down, but the yields have gone up and the production has sort of maintained itself, okay? So in the future, I don't think there's much more acreage around the world to grow rice. So it all has to come from input increases, which is an interesting thought, because what happens now is that we have China. I've already told you that China's had a COVID problem. They seem to have solved it, but we don't know. It's a riddle wrapped in a mystery inside an enigma. That's what Winston Churchill, the British Prime Minister, once said. And that's still true. If you look at how much fertilizer China uses, 4.5 times greater than that in India or the US or Brazil, 4.5 times more fertilizer to get the production they get. They want to be self-sufficient for milk, beef, lamb, rice, poultry, eggs, and pork. Yet they still require the long haul for their crude oil, which is then brought into their ports and processed as fertilizer and other inputs for the agricultural industry. It's 16,000 miles to get from a port in Brazil to Shanghai. So you have these huge distances that they're going across in order to have that self-sufficiency that they long for. And it's in their plan now over the next 5 years to become self-sufficient in everything. My question remains, how will China police its sea lanes without the help of the US Navy? If we become more isolationistic and withdrawn from the world, that is we being in the United States, who's going to protect those shipments from bad actors. Okay, this summer, we had an interesting thing. We have had a lot of rain. We've had the most rain in China in decades. And the Yangtze River has been flooding, but it hasn't flooded outside its banks because it's contained by canyons. And they say they have a higher rice crop in the south. And this river, the Yangtze River, is navigable all the way to the sea. The Chinese Yellow River is suffering massive flooding in the north, yet they say they've got a bigger rice crop, and it is navigable to the sea. Those are the two big rivers. Here's something that I came across. Since 1980, rice consumption has gone up by 39 million metric tons and production by 49 million metric tons, which leaves a space for increasing exports of 10 million tons. And production is exceeding consumption in these two countries. I call it Chindia because that's China and India put together. Stocks are going up, which Dennis noted, and exports are way up, okay? Well, exports are way up, mostly because of India. But prior to 2005, it was very dicey whether production or consumption was higher, and exports were irregular and stocks plunged. And why is that the case? Is it better technology? I say no, it's not better technology. It's more fortuitous weather. In both India and China, since about 2005, which is this line here, we've had almost every year way above normal rains. And this year in China, it's double normal rains. I find it hard to believe that their rice crop is up with the disastrous rains they've had there. I'm going to talk about Nigeria. It's not so happy a prospect there. But that's what they maintain, just like in COVID. They ain't got no COVID. So what can you say? You have to look at the official statistics and recognize that. But prior to 2005, it was very irregular weather. That has nothing to do with agricultural technology. It has everything to do with Mother Nature. For some reason, for years and years, really for 15 years, Mother Nature has been blessing all of Asia with extraordinarily good rains, particularly in India. Let's look at new disruptions, okay? High Brazil prices, high imports ahead for Brazil, risk of a La Nina drought, October, November in the Mercosur region. We're watching this area like a hawk. I'm getting estimates that in Paraguay and Argentina, the rice crop in the end with abandonment could be down 20 to 30%. That's just enormous. Uruguay and Brazil, not so sure. I'm sure the people listening will have much better opinions than I do on that. Production declines in Nigeria. I've been in contact with the second largest rice producer in Nigeria, and he told me exactly what's happening there. Production declines in Bangladesh, Cambodia, and Thailand. What is the real rice production in China? What is the real COVID rate in China? Who knows? Wheat is very high priced to rice right now, and wheat is breaking out to the upside, getting back to Dennis's comment about maybe we won't be in a very depressed market for price in the food grain sector. What does this mean to world rice trade? Well, let me try and give you a little perspective on it. The dollar is a magic here, and the dollar is going down. And as it goes down, our export price at the Gulf can go up, just like when Brazil's price went down, their export price could go up. And the fact of the matter is that we think at least you can lay $1 on the forecast for the rice price in the US just based on the dollar alone, even if it doesn't go lower from here. It's going down because of the elections and no vaccine and Lord knows what all. Here's an interesting chart by the International Grain Council through Peter Clubb, who's a brilliant guy, and he's produced some really interesting insights into rice. Rice has one basic problem. Hardly any of it trades in the world market. Hardly any of it. And so if there's a problem, rice is always on the price ranger's edge. If some country has a problem like Nigeria or Brazil or Bangladesh, then anything can happen. Here is a chart of the lower part of the Sahel, which is Nigeria and Niger. They're both on the Niger River. And my friend's located near Abuja, which is in the center of the country. And he has 45,000 hectares of rice. He has been able to apply the money to it. And his neighbors who are smaller farmers can't apply the money to it. They had a 4-week drought in the summer, which the press is not reporting on. And in addition to having a 4-week drought, they have had problems with weeds and they can't hire the labor. They can't provide for the fertilizer and the herbicides. and the crop is going to be down in yield and in area, with areas swept away because of the flood. And the water comes from the north-south, the Niger River, the Nile River, where it's the confluence of the White and the Blue Nile, reached the highest level in many decades this year. And all through this area, they have had water problems and weather problems. And of course, in countries like Nigeria, they have a shortage of hard currency. And my friend sent me a video on Twitter this week in Lagos, where the security guards opened fire on protesters protesting about, if you can believe it, police brutality. You could hear the rounds going off. I've been unable to talk to him. He's sort of disconsolate right now, and I can understand why. We've had a 4-week drought in Nigeria in July. As I said, we have weedy fields in August, leading to lower yields, lack of fertilizer, ability to purchase fertilizer, record flooding in September, and a threat of more floods coming from the upriver countries as they release the water in their dams. And the easy could be 2 million metric tons of paddy rice. The price spiked higher. It's now at 450. I heard rumors it was almost double that for a while. No, these people can't afford those kind of prices, okay? So what you have is you have a situation in sub-Saharan Africa, which has been a big growth demand area, but the production has been going up and mitigating the increase in imports. It's going up generally, but it's of a lower level. I'm allowing for some production decrease across sub-Saharan Africa this year. No one really knows what the figure is. If the crop is down 2 million tons plus, then perhaps the price will go up. I have it on the production. It should have been on the exports. The exports could go up, but who knows? But I'll tell you, I'm watching the export of parboiled rice from India and places like that. They have parboiled rice that's being loaded to go to Bangladesh. There's no agreement with them yet on Bangladesh. They probably need 500,000 tons themselves, again, because of flooding. So they put the destination as Bangladesh, where it's actually Benin. And then there's 4 cargoes at 40,000 each going to South Africa. If it makes it to South Africa, I'll be surprised. I think the buying is already starting, although my friend says it'll be several months before that happens. Who knows where we'll be when we get to this spring. He thinks it's going to be several months before this is totally affected on the market. But if there's 1 to 2 to 3 million tons of parboiled rice demand out there that's trying to get fulfilled across the border, we could have a change in the market out in the Far East. So I'm watching very closely the parboiled price in India at this time. The Brazil price is at $4.91 above the US closing price today on the exchange. That is a very widespread. That's the largest I've seen since I started keeping this data. So we are at a hugely discounted price to Brazil. To Brazil, and we had a pretty good export week. And I think it will continue to gather as we go down the line. I don't know if the US will have a chance at any parboiled export demand to Nigeria, but it's possible in 2021 that some would come from South America. I don't know. So these are just some of the things going on. Yeah, so you look at the Paraguay, and people on the phone call know much better than I do, but the idea that Paraguay's acreage, not planted, but harvested acreage can be down 20-30% is based upon the fact that they have a declining rainfall down there. And if you look closely at the Paraná River Basin, you will see that over the last decade or so, they have had below average rains. The only 2 times it was really up at all was because of El Ninos. We're not in an El Nino, ladies and gentlemen. We're in a La Nina, which can lead to droughts down there. And everyone's watching Brazil like a hawk because the U.S. soybean stocks are way down from what they were anticipated to be 3 months ago. That's why the price is high. If you look at the futures market, not in terms of the nearby contract, but the third deferred position, which is now March, we really never had that rally in June. That was in the nearby. In the deferred, that never happened. If you look back to 2008, the price spiked and all the contracts went up. That didn't happen this time around. New crop went nowhere when old crop was going to $22, $23. And that's because we have a good market that knows how to price things in, because they knew that we'd have a big crop and that new crop price was not going to go up. Whereas in 2008, we had a dysfunctional market and it couldn't do the job. Now it's doing the job. So we got a good futures market, ladies and gentlemen. If you have an opinion, you can express it by going short or long the futures market. We hope to do a seminar up ahead on this whole thing. Short red winter wheat has broken out to the upside. For my customers back in December, the market broke out to the upside. That's that lower trend line. And I said, beware of the market. It could go much higher. And in March, I said it could go to $18 to $32 based on my historical work. It only went to 23.57, but that's good enough for government work. So basically, you've had a breakout in the rice market in the nearby. In wheat, Chicago wheat, and also Kansas City wheat, the market has broken an 11-year downtrend line. Beware of a market getting bearish on a market like this. I'm not saying it's all going to happen right away, and the price of rice is very low. It's not only low relative to Brazil, but it's low relative to wheat. And this is a starch relationship. It's not a market relationship. And so you don't have a wheat acreage thing, but if I showed you a chart of the rice price versus soybean, it's already down to 50%. That's when we start switching out of rice acres in January into soybeans. And if this market for rice doesn't improve going into the end of the year, lo and behold, even if they're down in South America, people could end up growing soybeans here. And that means that we would have literally an acreage shortage across the Americas in the next 10 months or so. I've been in this business for 40 years. I've never seen a thing set up like this, where both South America and North America could end up having acreage shortages, even of a high price. I watched the global markets, and the only market that makes any sense is India, because the Indian price is back below its 5-year average. That's that little blue dotted line on the chart there in the middle left. And that makes sense. But the price in Thailand is too high. It should go lower. People want to know whether it's going to go below 400. I really don't know. And Vietnam's going up for 2 reasons. They're being inundated, flooded. The same old story. And they've got 300,000 of demand from Philippines, at least, that needs to be satisfied. You go over to Pakistan, it's slowly treading down with India. But this week it perked up a little bit. I believe, talking to a friend in Lahore, India, that China has bought at least 350,000 tons of rice in the past week from Pakistan, not from India. They're not on good terms with the Indians, and they're going to buy more rice. So I watch very closely, because I'm a bit concerned about whether China may have a worse position in their production than they're letting on to, but I don't know. Uruguay and Brazil are at just sky-high levels. We haven't seen this in a decade. It's actually at or above the 2008 highs. The one thing I like to watch is the seasonal trend. The seasonal trend should be down into the end of the year in Uruguay, Brazil, with India bottoming out probably in December, and the Asian markets bottoming out in December. So South America is not playing the tune. The reason is they ain't got no rice. They're trying to import and level it off. They're bringing in rice in containers, but people are saying the quality is off. So it gets to be a problem of who gets what, where, and when. The price in South America needs to be observed. I don't know where it goes next, but we're in the center of the hurricane, so to speak. We're in the eye of a price hurricane, and it's always tranquil in the center of the eye, but that doesn't mean you can't get hit on the other side. Okay, so sum it up. Milo's brain says seasonals for the US point lower for rice, rough rice, and it has been sort of softening. Buyer fatigue on the domestic demand for grocery. Stuart had a very good point about domestic demand. It is a riddle wrapped in an enigma, wrapped in a conundrum, like China. We don't know for sure. We do tit for tat and tat for tit. I have heard that institutional demand is up 20%. So I don't know what's true and what's not true. A kid told his mother, he said, "Hey, Mom, I'm tired of eating groceries. When are we going to go back to McDonald's?" So everybody wants to get out of the house and into the restaurant, but it can't happen right now with the COVID rate going up very easily. So it's robbing Peter to pay Paul, and whether there's a net gain in the domestic, I don't know. I think there is, but I don't know what it is. Asian rice seasonals point down, And India is following true to form. They've got a much larger crop and they are swamping the market with exports. Good for them. I say to my Indian friends when I do those seminars out there, I say, India's doing the right thing. They're helping to feed little kids at the end of the line. We're in a wonderful business. It's an essential business. It's one that helps keep people fed, particularly kids. The trade disputes with China, that's not bullish. US milled and rough have to come together. Milled's a little sticky versus rough rice. That's always true when you go from oversupply to undersupply and you've got a hole to fill with demand, okay? China's threatening its neighbors. Don't know where that goes. I don't know what happens to it. I've heard rumors that they may plan to invade Taiwan. I don't know. Supportive factors, okay? US dollar going down. I've already said you can put at least $1 on the US price just because of the value of the currency. And you folks down there in Latin America understand that because you've had weak currencies, particularly the Brazilian real. And that firms the export bid. Oh dear, I'm not getting my subtitles going. Let me see here. Just bear with me 1 second. Oh dear. Okay, so we've got to go and hold on a second. I think we're getting the thing back. I'm not, yeah, okay. So let me just go down to the world is full of disruptions in Milo's talk, I'll tell you that. Disruptions, it's a way of life. The US dollar is going down, strength, I've already told you about that. South American supplies, we got a total wipeout. Anything they get now has got to come from out of sight, out of mind, out of town. COVID-19 and floods in China. I have never seen floods like this in China. I think we don't have a precedent in the history of China with floods like this. Rice getting cheap to eat, I already mentioned that. Brazil may end up importing as much as 500,000 metric tons. They say it's got to get in by December, but if the acreage starts getting abandoned in November, I wonder if they'll open things up a bit more. That's just an insight. I don't know if it's true or not. And it's due to drought. US paddies at 265, Brazil 375, and Nigeria 450. So the mill price out of India may be low, but the paddy prices in two countries that need rice, Brazil and Nigeria, are very, very high. I don't know how you sort all that out, but everything I can see suggests that if you thought 2020 was a bit disruptive, wait for 2021. It may hit you in the side if you don't pay close attention to what could happen that you don't think can happen. Thank you very much. Sorry for the glitches in my report, but it's symptomatic of our time. We have disruptions. I turn it back over to Marcella.
Thank you so much, Milo. Muchas gracias, Milo. Tus conocimientos y años de experiencia se reflejan siempre en tus presentaciones. Gracias, Milo. En este momento vamos a poner otra encuesta en sus pantallas y a la misma vez, por favor, seguimos con lo mismo. Utilicen este tiempo para mandarnos sus preguntas. Tenemos algunas que vamos a leer terminando la encuesta. Y les voy a pedir a todos los ponentes que prendan su video y su audio para el final de la encuesta. Stuart, if you could turn on your video and audio when you get a chance. Thank you.
Sorry, I was getting my Bluetooth connected again.
Totally understand. Just a couple more seconds here for the poll. La pregunta es, ¿te gustaría participar en un networking virtual? Would you like to participate in a virtual networking event? And the results are 86% yes, un 86% de sí. Entonces trataremos de incluir una parte de networking en nuestra siguiente sesión. En este momento vamos a abrir a todos los ponentes las siguientes preguntas. Dwight, ¿quieres?
I have
Dwight?
a question. Yo tengo pregunta 1 o 2.
Okay.
¿Debo hablar en español? ¿Está bien? Sí. Yo quiero preguntar Milo algo. Milo, ¿hay traducción de eso? ¿Eh?
No, say it in English, please.
Okay. All right, Milo. I'm going to ask you a question. In your conversations with the Asians, what are the people? What are the exporters out of India or other origins in Asia saying about the Brazilian market? Do you know if there extensive offers of rice out of Asia going into Brazil and with much success?
No, I don't get that. I get it's in containers. These are container shipments, and the stuff is not of high quality, and it's a bit of a disappointment to those that have actually seen what's come in. So that's not a good advertisement for India, which has some very good quality basmati and things like that. But I think when they're talking about importing rice, I think they're talking about Thailand, though I've heard no bids or anything out of Thailand. So I don't know. I don't get the impression it's very much. And you know, we're running out of time because December 15th they closed down, as you well know. So the whole thing is difficult to figure in. The timing and everything is just really hard to figure out. But I just don't get an impression that large quantities are coming from India to Brazil.
Okay, and another maybe Stuart has looked at this, or both of you. Imports into the United States. I now see that imported rice into the United States is more than 25% of our, just over 25% of our domestic market. Driven by, I'm sure, Thai jasmine, but are there some other factors that are driving this that you're aware of?
I have customers that buy those rices, but I think there's a whole network set up, and I think it goes to the ethnic markets as well as the American consumer. Everybody raves about aromatic rices from the Far East, and it just continues to pile up every year.
And I think some of that is, I agree with Milo. And I think in addition to that, you also have Chinese rice that's being imported into the United States, like Milo mentioned, going to the ethnic markets. But the Chinese demographic in the United States continues to grow. And so I think that's part of the explanation for continued increase in imports out of China.
We do have a couple questions that have come in. What is the price projections for paddy rice for the January, February?
Where?
Is that FOB New Orleans? Is it on the farm? What delivery point?
NOLA.
New Orleans.
I'll take a stab at that. Yeah, I don't see how the market's going to get much over 13 without outside influences. The market goes up to 13 and it bounces back. And if you take out that run up in June, and that's towards $5-6 a bushel, it just can't seem to get through there. It's going to take a while. Something's going to have to happen. Events outside the US, I mentioned some that could happen. The dollar could go down more, but it's just like a brick load over on top of the market right now.
I agree with Milo. I think you need to see Brazil buy another 30,000 tons, which, as I understand, they're currently expected to do over the next few months. You need to see Mexico catch up to where they were last year. And then you need to see the domestic market escalate as well. And I think it's really hard to imagine the market improving from here unless those three things come to fruition. And if they do, then I think you might see some minor improvement. But like Milo mentioned, last year it took a perfect storm to drive prices to where it went, and that was on a much tighter supply. This year we have enough rice, and so I think ultimately we need those three extra: Brazil, Mexico, Haiti, also, who was very far behind in the domestic market, in order to support today's prices and maybe even go up from here at all.
One further thing about Nigeria, I have brought it to the attention of people in Washington, D.C. They're looking into the possibility of opening up trade with Nigeria. I think it's beyond a long shot, but it's possible. I do think that Nigeria might buy rice from Brazil or South America this coming year in 2021.
You know, I want to add on the January pricing question. You know, we still continue to harvest rice, even though we're in the last chapter of the Delta, but we're not getting any major news out of that. There's nothing that of extreme concern. There's not in these horror stories of milling yields or chalkiness. So it looks to be a fairly good quality and a good volume of rice. I agree with the guys, unless something unexpected, and this is a year of unexpected, and next year, I see that price in New Orleans hovering around the 318, 320 a ton, FOB New Orleans. But, you know, we haven't even brought up Iraq that continues to be rumored, but we're going to need some volume movement in a few markets to move the price. But I don't see it going down, really. I see it staying relatively.
I would say, I'm not, so just to add on one more thing, you know, knowing that we've only milled about 9% of the entire crop, I think it is hard to know exactly what the yields are going to be when we get further into the season. Hasta ahora solamente molinimos 9% de todo el cultivo nuevo, entonces no sabemos mucho en cuanto de la calidad. Entonces, en un par de semanas vamos a como aprender, comprender mucho más.
Tenemos dos preguntas más. We have two other questions come in. The first one is, how will the elections, or how could the elections affect the U.S. rice market, the U.S. elections?
Wow.
Go ahead, Dwight.
That's a tiny question.
Okay, I can give a fake news report, maybe.
Oh, God.
You know, that's I need Alice Gomez or Bernie Hubert maybe on this, but you know, there's not a day goes by that we're not talking about this election. Never in my lifetime, I don't think that there's been such concern, interest in this election, but we hope to do a session after the election, do a convention session on this, and bring in several of our Washington specialists and government specialists to discuss this very thing. You know, I can't answer that one way or the other. I'm sorry. I wish I knew. If I knew, I wouldn't be sitting right here, probably.
It's a good topic for next time. For next, the next.
Excellent question with no answer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the second question is for Milo. Milo, where did you get the number that Brazil might need to import 500,000 metric tons?
That was the original estimate. I'm not sure it will go that high. Looking back at it, I think they've kind of done buying from the U.S. I didn't say from the U.S., I just said in the world. And a lot of that is going to hinge on whether we see abandonment of rice acreage in the two countries I mentioned over the next 30 to 60 days, based upon the La Nina and the drought down there in the Paraná River and all the things I mentioned. So it would get into the possibility that they're not going to have enough supply to make it through next year. And so that would be extending the deadline date. I don't know if that's possible or not beyond, say, mid-December. Originally, we thought we'd have a nice, simple situation with the crop. And it could start to rain and then the whole thing goes away. The thing that everybody on the call from South America understands is the water is fed from reservoir 70%, 70% and 30% from rivers. In Arkansas, it's all well water coming out of the ground. They're going to have a crop if it isn't torn down by the hurricane. Down there, you can see rice acres being abandoned if there's no water. And that's the problem. is whether that's going to happen. We've had years where the acreage has gone down dramatically. So it's just a wild card, but it's not looking too good actually in terms of the weather people I'm watching. I hope and pray everything will be okay down there. We don't need another shortage. We really don't.
Another question just came in. How much rice has Paraguay exported to Brazil?
I don't have a clue. I really don't keep watching those numbers.
I want to say, without looking at reference average over the last 2-3 years, has been in the 300,000 ton milled basis range. It was probably a little bit higher this year. Paraguay basically sold out their rice, sold out to Brazil, cleaned out the bins, I understand. So, but I think it's roughly a 300,000 ton mill base market for Paraguay, but I need to check those figures.
All of this relates to the weather. If the weather turns okay, we don't have a problem. But if it doesn't, you're going to see acreage abandonment. I don't know where Brazil would stand in all that. I don't know if they can come back in November and plant rice. I don't know. Do you know anything about that, Dwight, whether they can fill the gap left by either Paraguay or Argentina?
Well, I think right now and probably the next session we do here in 30, 45 days, we do it specifically on Mercosur and have our friends, the leadership out of Mercosur do a session as they get ending their planting season. I understand they have about a window of 15 to 20 days left to plant this crop. It continues to be extremely difficult. No significant rain in the reservoirs. So after 15 or 20 days, you're getting in a late planting situation that will affect yields. And, you know, there's just a lot of uncertainty as to what is going on. The weather stories are horrific down there. And it has created tremendous logistic problem for Paraguay and probably Argentina on the river. As many of you know, the fires up in the Pantanal area of Brazil is where these rivers are fed from in Paraguay. So it's a serious issue. If something, as I said, if something doesn't happen in the next 15 to 20 days, as far as significant rain, then you're going to see a large drop off, I'm afraid. So
one small point, and that affects the production of beans and corn in South America as well. And people are watching for late planted and problems there. If you have a problem with the acreage down there and the price goes up in the Americas, that doesn't necessarily mean that our farmers will increase their plantings of rice. If they can get a better bean price than a rice price at about 50-45, they're going to abandon rice and go to beans. So you've got drought abandoning acreage down there and farmers up here going to the better crop, the bean crop.
That's right.
Yeah, right. So you could have a double shortage of acreage next year in the Americas, and that opens it up for imports from the Far East by de facto. I don't like it.
Yeah, but that's true. The biggest competitor for rice in the United States is corn and soybeans in the Delta.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's
you know, talking about Mercosur, you know, our friends down there, we're observers from up here, observers in what we read and talking to them on the phone. But I think one of our one of our next sessions, maybe not the next or the one after, as the crop is finished being planted in Mercosur, I think we get our leadership from the various countries and do a session on this that is will be so important to everyone.
Yeah, it's been a real education for me in the last 5 months. I've been in the market 40 years and I didn't quite realize some of the things that are going on. And one thing about a crisis and a disruption is you begin to see how it's put together. As the Germans say, if you want to know how the barn's built, watch it burn. Sorry. I'll shut up.
Very good.
There's no other questions. Si tienen alguna otra pregunta, utilizamos todavía unos minutitos más aquí. We're going to wait just a couple more minutes to see if there's any other questions coming in. Again, thank you to our speakers. I want to remind everybody that you could go into our www.rmtc Rice Market Technology Convention.com to visit our virtual booths, visit our sponsors, exhibitors. You're able to, like we showed at the beginning of the intro, you're able to go into the sponsors' Zooms that they'll be available after our conference ends. All the information is there as well. Vamos a hacer una pequeña demostración de cómo podemos volver a entrar. Hacen clic al logo y ahí en donde está hagan clic en el Zoom, ahí pueden entrar y van a encontrar a los expositores y a los sponsors. Pueden hacer clic en cualquiera de los logos y los llevará al Zoom de esa empresa. Parece ser que todavía no tenemos preguntas. Entonces, si quieres, Dwight, cerrar la sesión.
Muy bien, gracias a todos. No sé si la traducción andaba ahí al final cuando estuvimos hablando, pero era principalmente sobre el Mercosur y las condiciones de siembra ahí que está muy complicado y los próximos 15, 20 días son fundamentales para ellos y para ver si pueden lograr sembrar un volumen de arroz significativo. Yo creo que en el próximo sesión o más adelante armamos una sesión con nuestros contactos en cada país, los líderes de Mercosur, para hablar sobre la situación mismo, porque ellos son los que están en la tierra y nosotros observando desde acá. Bueno, estoy muy agradecido. Gracias, Milo, Stuart, Marcela, Verónica, Bianca, Grace, todo el equipo de US Rice Producers. Y a ustedes también. Cualquier cosa, si tienen pregunta para Dennis, nos envía, hacemos llegar. Seguimos en la vida de Zoom. Cuídate, suerte. Cuídense y sus familias y nos vemos en el futuro cercano, ojalá. Gracias.